Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Eden. So today's daily, I would say, started out pretty badly. It was kind of a slog, but then it got better, and then it got a lot better, and maybe it was a bit more gradual than they make it out to be, but it definitely was one of those runs where I think patience and just perseverance really pay off in the end. Sure, there's a little bit of luck and maybe some decision making, but I feel like, if you take your time, if you just go through it, you can play this one smart and just maybe play it slow. Sure, you're gonna take a lot of damage because it's gonna be difficult at the start, but if you get maybe through that initial hoop, you're gonna have a good time. Still, I would say that this run, even though maybe it was very good, it wasn't very satisfying. This is something I bring up a lot whenever a run is satisfying. Or sometimes, it feels like you earned the victory, and that's obviously satisfying, or sometimes you get a really good item, and maybe it's satisfying to just go in a room and kill everyone. But in this one, it still felt like the run is strong, and maybe you feel like you have enough stats to kind of tackle the rooms, but it doesn't feel like you're really doing all that much. And when you combine all of those things, I feel like it definitely wasn't ideal, if that makes sense. But I think a lot of part of that was just the starting stats, and we're so used to the certain maybe default stats that we have. It feels comfortable, it feels very, I would say, welcome to have a 10 tier delay, for example, or a 1 or 1.2, I think that is the default one, speed stat. And when that is lowered by, I would say, a pretty significant margin, it feels very underwhelming, and especially when you have a combination of those stats which are lowered. So in this case, we had lower range, lower shot speed, lower tier delay, and I also think lower speed. Yeah, so all of those things were lower, and when you I think if you take one of them individually away, it's very much manageable. But if you take multiple of those stats, it becomes to feel like you're not playing the same game you're usually playing. It feels like you're playing against the controls a lot more than you're playing against the enemies. You're not dodging in time. You feel like maybe your shot just doesn't reach to the end of the room, and maybe you feel like your knockback is just not strong enough to really kind of keep the enemies at bay. So you kind of have to adjust your playstyle. You just have to kind of expose yourself, and eventually you get it down. But just that initial hoop, or just trying to start to get used to it, can be a bit difficult, and I guess that's what I'm talking about. The only saving grace really was our maybe a little bit of above average starting damage at 4.2 instead of a 3.5, which might not seem a lot, but I do say that it's not so much about the actual stat, but just how many hits it actually takes to kill an enemy. And being at 4.2 does actually allow you to kill some enemies which take 3 hits, or some enemies which take 2 hits, to actually kill them in one less hit, and that's, I would say, always a very welcome addition. It's maybe very much a silver lining, because having a 0.7 damage upgrade, it's really not gonna have an effect on the run, but it maybe makes some of those earlier floors just a little bit more bearable. So as the run is kind of going on here, I think the first major decision here is picking up Dead Cat, or 9 lives. And a lot of people don't really like this item to a certain extent, because why you're picking it up, right? There's really not a good reason to pick it up in a lot of cases, except for the Guppy transformation, but with how the item works, it's a bit weird. And essentially, when you pick it up, you get 9 lives, and each one of those 9 lives actually counts as a separate item. And that's not that big of a problem, except for the fact that that's like 300 or 400 points in the average case, and in the most cases this item is just not gonna do anything for you. It's just gonna add item penalty on top of that. You're usually not gonna get the Guppy transformation, so what urged me to actually take it in this case? Well, usually why I think this is not a very welcome item is because it doesn't do anything, but in this case I wanted some extra security. I knew that run was going bad, I knew maybe that I wasn't as strong as I maybe felt like I was, but most importantly, it does allow me to be a little bit more adventurous in taking the devil deals. It allows me to maybe sacrifice my health sometimes in order to really get another chance. So I definitely took this item more defensively, but also just more of a utility purpose. And I feel like if you're gonna pick it up for any reason, that's usually gonna be the best idea. So now suddenly, even if a devil deal appears and we're at very low health, we can still afford to take it. And this is exactly what happened yesterday. I think at 2.5 hearts overall, so I had half of a spirit heart and 2 red health, and then I picked up Mom's Knife, which was 2 health, so I was left with half of a spirit heart, and obviously that's dangerous, because then I pretty much die in one shot. But if you have 9 lives, you still know you have kind of 9 more health remaining after that initial one, so it just gives you, I would say, a little bit more security, a little bit more stability, and if for nothing else, I think the 300 points are worth it, just maybe to feel a little bit safer. So, of course, there's also this possibility of getting the Guppy transformation. I'm not saying that that's not a factor, and especially when when a run is this weak, I feel like we almost need it if we actually want to succeed. So I kind of picked it up for a twofold reason, and I feel like that's maybe the right way to approach it in this particular instance. So you can see our stats now have improved at 7 delay, at 7.7 damage. We might feel like this is enough, but for some reason it still felt a little bit sluggish, and I'm not sure if it's maybe just some of the rune combinations we face, a lot of the enemies which maybe you really can't damage directly, like a lot of knights or maybe a lot of weird ghosts, or maybe those sister visas which throw the leeches at you. I'm not really sure what they are, but that's a bit problematic because you have to be at a very certain angle. It's not like you walk into a room, you kill the enemies. You have to be very careful about how you position yourself. And I've learned about something today which is very strange and very odd. And we picked up the soul at a certain point. Obviously that's a great defensive item because it allows you to kind of rebound projectiles as they're going in your direction, but it does more than that. So the knights, which are the enemies which are only vulnerable from one side, like their brain is showing and you have to hit them in that particular spot, they're actually affected by the soul. So if you go behind them, or just, any direction, you're actually gonna push them away. For some reason, the game treats them like they're projectiles, which is super, super unusual and super odd. I never really seen this interaction before, but it's something that's kind of threw me off, because as soon as I kind of baited one to go into the corner, I went right behind it, obviously, but because of my pushback, it got confused, and then it turned around and actually rammed into me, which was an unexpected consequence. But definitely, I would say, a good thing to keep in mind. So maybe if you don't take anything else away from this, is that the soul actually affects knights and a lot of other enemies, I suspect, which have, I would say, a predetermined path or whatever. But yeah, okay. So once I got through that, and a lot of, I would say, very cheap damage instances, we managed to complete the Gupster transformation. And at this point, I started to feel a lot more comfortable. Our tier delay was at a very decent 4, and later on it gets down to 3. And I was feeling like, we can take on Hush. And especially now we've got a lot more spirit cards. We even got the blue candle, which is great because it gives us some defensive maneuvers, because we can block shots with it, but also because Hush is such a big target, you can kind of maximize the time the actual flame stays on him, and it actually does deal quite a significant portion of his damage. I think the only thing at this point that we have to worry about, I'm pretty sure we can take down Mega Satan and most of the Dark Room as we actually get to it. The only thing is maybe Swag. So are there any ways to really kind of maximize on that? And I feel like there's no obvious solution. I didn't see anything too obvious appear. I think that someone said that there was a D100, and obviously if we had that, we could have used that if we wanted, if we had the time. But later on, we just got, I would say, I think a sack of sacks, a humbling bundle in this case, obviously, and that's pretty much it. There's really not much more I've actually seen in order to break the game. Obviously, I've tried to kind of maximize our points as I usually do, but I just didn't see anything too obvious which would have provided us, I would say, with an easy point gain. And to some extent that's good, but to some extent that isn't, because that means that I'm sure that there's someone outside who's actually managed to find it, and they're just gonna get a lot more points. Especially when you have a run that goes to Mega Satan and is relatively weak. If someone finds a way to break the game, they're gonna be much more ahead of other people who didn't find it. So for example, let's say there are 5 people in total who also had a very weak run at the start, and they maybe didn't get through it, but they maybe found something before the Depths 2. And at the Depths 2, what you can do then, of course, is get both Mama Megas. You can get a Mama Mega and duplicate it with Diplopia, and then you can use both of them to get to Boss Rush and Hush. And even though your run is very weak at the start, it can turn out to be still a very massive point gain. It's essentially like you didn't miss out on anything, regardless of how weak your run was. You can even get hit so many times just to maybe try to afford it. Maybe someone goes to the sacrifice room and plays that until they get a really good item, and maybe that allows them to do all of the objectives. And obviously in a lot of cases that would have been the bad idea because the damage penalty is way too high to justify it, but maybe in this case you get something like Godhead, and that's exactly the secret that you need in order to get to the end. And obviously that's just some of those variance-induced results that you shouldn't kind of look onto. You shouldn't say you made the right play because it managed to be the right one in this particular instance. You kind of have to look at an average case scenario, and I feel like whenever I approach a daily, I need to kind of emphasize that. So because some of my decisions might seem dumb, not risky enough, I usually try to play in a sense where this particular move that I make will be the best if it happened in any other circumstance as well, or I would say in that particular circumstance it's gonna work out best in the average case scenario. So as we finish the run, of course, we beat Mega Satan, we pick up the trophy, and we finish at 41,000 points, which is not too terrible. Definitely isn't ideal. 50,000 points is very high, Something like 45,000 I feel like is already very decent for this run, but besides that, you know, our damage penalty is very high, exploration bonus maybe isn't as high, our item penalty is surprisingly low for considering that we actually picked up so many items, especially when you consider that that cat is essentially considered as 9 items. But the rest of the score, 31st, which is like top 20, and the time is also very decent, so I can't complain too much. It actually felt a lot weaker, I didn't think I would rank this well, but I guess taking that guppy really did kind of cement my victory in some sense, because it did allow me to really output a lot more damage. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.